Welcome back to Paper Mill Playhouse. I'm producing artistic director Mark Hoebee, and this is Babbling by the Brook. Today, I'm delighted to have our first guest designer on the series. He is a Drama Desk and Emmy winner and a multi-Tony Award nominee. His incredible scenic designs have been on the Paper Mill stage in Bandstand, Godspell, The Other Josh Cohen, and many more. And on Broadway, his work can be seen in Dear Evan Hansen, Beetlejuice, Hamilton, and a list as long as my arm. Please help me welcome David Korins. David Korins, how are you?
I'm good. I'm as good as can be in the global pandemic world.
I know. It's so good to see you. I feel like in some ways, I feel like I've just seen you recently. And in some ways, I feel like I haven't seen you in a long time. But
I know. Well, I think it's a little bit of both, right? Relative to people who I've seen in the world, I've seen you relatively recently, but I haven't seen anyone in about 7 months. So there's that.
Right, I know. But thank you for joining us today on this little online conversation show. You're actually the first designer that we're talking to. We talked to actors, animal trainers, fight directors, but
Wow.
You are our premiere episode with a designer. And
in a way, designers are kind of actors and animal trainers also, you know?
Well, they do it all. They do it all.
True.
But I can't imagine talking to anyone better from the Paper Mill family, but just in the world of theater, because you are so prolific. I mean, what you have designed, like your list of credits is unbelievable when you sit down. So I'm going to take a moment. I mean, for us, your designs have been on stage in Bandstand, Other Josh Cohen, Godspell. We had your set from Vanya and Sonia and Masha and Spike and Diary of Anne Frank.
Yep.
Then on Broadway, I don't even know if I can get through this whole list. Mrs. Doubtfire, Great Society, Beetlejuice, Bandstand, Warpaint, Dear Evan Hansen, Misery, Hamilton, Motown, Vanya and Sonia, Annie, Bring It On, Magic Bird, An Evening with Patti LuPone and Mandy Patinkin, Godspell, Chinglish, Pee Wee Herman Show, Lombardi, Passing Strange, Bridge and Tunnel, not to mention television, Grease Live, which I loved, by the way.
Thank you.
For which you won an Emmy, I believe.
It's true. It's true.
Amazing. And film and concerts for Lady Gaga.
Mark, I'm blushing. Literally,
Yeah.
I'm blushing. Stop. I can't believe you memorized all that.
Yeah, I did. I had committed it to memory. But I think it's important for a lot of reasons. One, because you are, I just admire your work so much.
Thank you.
And you're so versed in, and also you designed a restaurant. And I think, we've had a great time working with you in the theater. I remember the very first project you did for us was the Diary of Anne Frank.
Yeah.
And I remember sitting at the pitch meeting and talking how the apartment, or it wasn't an apartment, but the set for the house, the hidden house, was going to float above the stage, above a sea of red tulips.
Yeah.
And I thought, okay, wow, how's that going to happen? And then boom, it did beautifully. And,
yeah. Well, the truth is, it's easy for a designer to say something like a house is going to float, up on stilts over a sea of thousands of red tulips. There are about this many theaters in the entire country that could pull that off. I said it, but you guys made it a reality. And that's the kind of amazing thing when you're a designer. You sort of say, this is my idea, and then 95% of it is in the execution of the idea. And I remember when the lighting designer turned the lights on in that design and thinking, oh my God, you can't see those stilts at all. The house really does float over that sea of tulips. And I thought the Paper Mill Playhouse is one of the preeminent places. It's so close to the city, and it really makes kind of your dreams possible, because there's a lot of ways that could have played out, including not floating at all. Certainly, that was probably the biggest budget and the largest physical production I had designed to that point in my career. And to see that you could collaborate so closely and so beautifully with an institution like that and have them kind of realize your dreams really gave me a lot of wind in my sails that that kept me buoyant for a long time. It was a big head start for me.
Well, it was a beautiful production, beautifully put together, beautifully directed, beautifully cast. But I do remember that that conversation when you brought up the idea, and then going into tech. Not the first day when they were standing all the tulips up, but when they finally closed it all in, and there were mirrors around the outside, so the tulips seemed to go on forever.
Yeah.
And I can't remember who lit that show, but when the first cue came up to show that, it was magical.
Yeah.
It was truly floating, and it really underscored the beauty and the horror of that story, which is what I
Yeah. I
wanted to.
mean, oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say, because I don't think most people understand really what a set designer does in providing an environment that supports but also tells its own story.
Right.
And that's what I wanted to talk to you about.
Well, I think, the job of the set designer is obviously, in layman's terms, we create the physical environment in the world of the show, and then the lighting designer kind of reveals it moment to moment. The truth is, I like to think of the set designer kind of as a co-conceiver of how we're going to present a show with the director. And, lots of directors work in lots of different ways, but I think as a set designer, we always have to kind of fight against our impulses to be cool and do like the cool or flashy thing. To me, my kind of North Star of how I always try and do it is, am I helping tell the best possible version of the show without literally telling the show with the set? And there's a lot of times when you're challenged, you mentioned Vanya, Sonia, Masha, and Spike. It's a good example because Christopher Durang writes kind of zany characters. And if the set design was going to follow literally like the timbre and quality of those characters, you might see really wonky spaces and, twisted doorways and things like that. But I think in a way, the set designer's job in that particular case is to kind of design a world that could hold a heightened story, but to kind of ground them and be like real. You want to set it up as the real world so that the people and then the story becomes and unfolds kind of in a weird way. With the Diary of Anne Frank, it's the same thing. It's like that show has real and extreme physical parameters. And I was lucky enough to go to Amsterdam and see the real Anne Frank house, and I was struck by the scale of it. Actually, it's bigger than you think. We all live in New York City and we think, 3,000 square feet or 2,400 square feet, that seems like a lot of space. It's not if you're stuck there for 2 years and you can never get out, although how much more poignant than right now, feeling like we're stuck in apartments. But what was so striking in that way was to try and create an environment that felt as isolated as possible. And that's how we got to the floating house, because it was the characters could literally never leave that physical space. Only I think in the kind of epilogue of the show did Otto Frank step down into the tulips and have a moment in which he was kind of finally free. But it was really about creating claustrophobia. So the designer, creates the world and the environment without doing the job of the playwright and the actor. And that's interesting. I used to tell my mother, my parents, what the set designer does is if you rip the top of the theater off of the box and you turn it upside down and you shake it, everything that falls out that's not an actor, I make. That kind of like serves for a while, but on a deeper level, we make the environment.
Funny. And I remember very well that last moment when Otto Frank walked out. He had actually exited. They'd all left the set, and he walked on the stage level through the tulips, and it was striking. And I also remember Vanya and Sonia and Masha and Spike, and the way you describe it is exactly right. I wanted to live in that set. That set felt so realistic and warm and friendly. I wanted to live in that set on our stage. I don't mean like in the country. I mean, literally.
No, I get it.
But then you're right. That allowed an environment to support the crazy activity going on in that show.
Yeah.
Jump forward to Beetlejuice.
Yes.
Which is we skipped over Hamilton. We'll get back to that. But so Beetlejuice, just a crazy environment. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, well, that's actually a really good example of having to look yourself in the mirror, or in this case, look at Alex Timbers and have a conversation about, hey, we could fight against the aforementioned zany angles and all that stuff and just do kind of a more straight-laced rectilinear house. But I think with Beetlejuice, we felt a real responsibility to deliver kind of like the oeuvre and the visual vocabulary that is Tim Burton. You know, Tim Burton has created such an extreme and amazingly large canvas and body of work over the last 30 years or so, that it kind of in a way blends together with that Burtonian look, whether it's Beetlejuice or Charlie and the Chocolate Factory reboot or Nightmare Before Christmas or any of his kind of iconic visuals. We said, yeah, we could do the house, which again, not unlike Anne Frank, it's a story about kind of claustrophobia, being locked inside this house. And then what does it mean to, live in this place? We felt a responsibility to deliver that language. And so in the beginning of Beetlejuice, we make a pact with them when the curtain rises up and we're in the graveyard. We're saying, hey, we know his work. We love his work. We're fans also. We're going to take care of you. And so we actually designed a version of that house that was kind of straight up and down. And then we designed a version of that house that was wonky and twisted angles. And we said, we've got to do the Burtonian angles because we feel like we'd be missing an opportunity to deliver that language. But that show, as far as the set design, is probably the most complicated that I've ever designed because the house gets, possessed 3 different times. There's, 3 different owners, essentially. We have to completely change all the furnishings, all the walls, all the fixtures, everything. And then there's multiple other locations, including the netherworld and crazy other things. And there isn't a piece of scenery on stage that doesn't have a light in it, a special effect, smoke, pyrotechnics, speakers, puppetry. It's insane. So in that way, Alex and I worked on that show for 5.5 years before it had its first physical production.
Right. And I think that is the part that people don't understand, how much planning and specificity goes in to each moment in the show, each piece of, like you said, each piece of furniture, each wall, each drop, each doorway. And then how much of that stays the same and how much of that changes through the process. And with, well, like a show like Diary of Anne Frank, we keep circling back to that, but it's a known piece, it's a known story, and it's a known environment. It still exists. So you're riffing off something that's real and bringing your own taste to it and you and the director's viewpoint. But to create a brand new world, I mean, Beetlejuice obviously had the film, but never on stage before. And to create that environment, and with a new musical that's changing, right? They're rewriting.
Yeah, of course.
Songs are in, songs are out, scenes are moved. I always think that must drive a set designer crazy because, like, if we move something in Act 1 to Act 2, you've stacked the set in a way that it accordions together and opens up, and it's not that easy just to pick a piece up and move it.
No, it's not. I mean, actually, and I know, unlike many people who run institutions, you have made work before, so you understand the intricacies of that operation. You're absolutely right. The set is oftentimes the most expensive and certainly the largest piece of a physical production. And you hit it on the head. You 16 weeks at least before people show up on stage in tech, we're building this thing. And so when someone says, that scene at the drive-in, I don't think it's going to work here, we're going to move it. You're right. There's like thousands of pounds of stuff hanging over your head. It's not just that easy to shuffle the deck. And we have to take that in consideration. I think also being a set designer, we kind of toe the line between sculptor, architect, engineer, fine artist, installation artist, and storyteller, and in all equal parts, because you're right, you hit it. It seems like a small thing, but what a door needs to do. It's got to be light so the actor who's carrying the couch in it can move it, but it also has to be able to slam, and also the doorknob is fake, and also it isn't going to be their next scene. It's like all these things. Every single piece is accounted for, and there are no mistakes at the end that show up on stage. There might be happy accidents, but there are no mistakes. Every single moment of a show is accounted for scenically, and we're watching it all.
The 2 things I want to comment on. One is that specificity that you're talking about. And yes, which way does the door open? Does it open? Does it open in? Does it open out? Are the hinges on this side? And it seems silly to talk about a door, but people don't even think about it. And I can't tell you how many times I've been directing a show and they go, oh, yeah, the door needs to open the other way, right? It needs to hinges on the left, not the right, and it needs to open upstage, not downstage, which seems like a simple thing, but it's not a simple thing in the design. We talk often, I think, about the developmental process of the show, meaning the script and the score and the storyline and the arc of the piece and all of that. And it's why people understand there are readings and workshops and, out of town productions and, a regional production before it goes to New York, all of those things. But it's the same journey for the set.
No one hits the nail on the head. No one hits the bullseye first time out. I don't care if it's a writer, a director, a performance, or a designer. And you're right. The work always expands to the amount of time allotted in every project. There will be wet paint and freshly hung wallpaper on opening night, regardless of how much time you've had. But in particular with the design, there are small nuanced things that we're always tweaking. And then there's big, huge, as you mentioned, like reshuffling the scenes that you've mentioned. And that's why the paper mill is actually really interesting, because it kind of toes the line between a very large, very public, right in the heart of the tri-state area. It's the epicenter. Everyone can get out there. But also a lot of people use it as a pre-Broadway stop. And so it toes the line because you don't feel like the stakes are any less high. But also, sometimes it's on the journey to a pre-Broadway production and you're trying out those ideas. Bandstand is a good example of that. Our set for Bandstand completely changed between the paper mill and Broadway, but the jawbones of the idea were the same. Meaning we were doing the best we could with the writing that we had at the time that we had allotted, to really try out those ideas to see how narratively and physically they would work out. And then you sort of go like, honestly, drop your ego, check all that at the door. Let's look at this kind of full scale version and say, how have we done? What can we do better? And also, what can we salvage?
Well, I remember so much about Bandstand from the first meeting that we had. I think it was in your office, and we sat with Tom Smees, our producing partners, to look at the set design. And you were very honest, and you're like, "We're not there." You said, "We're not there yet," and you had showed us some things, and you weren't happy with it. Andy wasn't happy with it, and I think it was in that meeting in that office, we talked to Andy. We said, throw everything out. Where would the show take place? And he described something like the Supper Club in the Edison. Remember that? And then all of a sudden, a new idea was sparked, and some of your design that you'd already done molded together into what eventually wound up on the paper mill stage, which was spectacular. But I do remember the first day you and Andy walking around the set going, this isn't right. It's too clean. Got to dirty that up. I was like,
yep.
No, it looks great.
Listen, it's very, very, very challenging as artists to make time to schedule to be creative. Yeah. And sometimes you're out running in the park and something comes to you in a moment of inspiration. And sometimes you just have to beat your head against the wall and like pull those ideas out. It's really challenging. And fortunately, nothing gets to show up better than an opening night. But unfortunately, maybe the art isn't quite ready. And Andy Blankenbuehler, the director choreographer of that show, who is a very frequent collaborator of mine and a dear friend, he's like an animal. He knows certain moments on the first day, exactly what it's going to be like. And I mean tempo, precise, perfect. And other things, you just don't know. So I think where we were in that meeting, which I remember vividly, was we probably had half to 3/4 of the show staged, but the environment was lagging behind. And we eventually found it, but you're absolutely right. A lot of what that piece was, getting back to what does the set designer really do? A lot of what that piece was about trying to create an environment that is small town Cleveland. right?
Right.
This is about a group of people who came home from a war. They went back to their hometown and they're trying to find who they are through PTSD and also through like a really tough time in the world. And they've never been anywhere glitzy, anywhere with a physical environment or a building taller than like 5 stories. And they take this magical journey to this place, this mythical place called New York City.
Right.
And that's where we have to deliver, a hugely amazing, magical fever dream version of New York City that they go to perform in this competition. And how do you do that? Also, the paper mill is such a vast, voluminous space that making small club in Cleveland, where 90% of the show takes place, is a different kind of challenge. So
Right.
you're right. We had to find the quality of small town Cleveland. And then we had to kind of plus it up times 20 to get to the big glitzy New York City version. And it was interesting.
And then I do remember, because Andy was on this program too, and we talked about it, one of the most amazing transformations of a new piece, first time on its feet, that I've ever seen was after that first weekend of previews. And the whole team came together and said, wow, the show's way too long. And we have to cut 20 minutes out of Act 1.
Yep.
And that's a big job for any creator, be it the director, the choreographer, the composer, the book writer, whatever. But then in those couple of days, they are chopping stuff away. And then your mind has to be going crazy about, okay, so can we make this scenic change? What's going to happen when the drums have to be staged right instead of stage left on that platform? How's all that going to occur? And magically it did. In 2 days, 20 minutes was cut out of that first act beautifully. And the audience that was there that first Wednesday night of the second week had no idea the surgery that happened over those 2 days. But you, as a scenic designer, thinking through the physical elements, knowing that it's right, what's happening is right for the show. The stuff that's being excised and moved and rewritten, but there must be an anxiety for you about, can I now deliver that with this set?
Oh, it's a nightmare. I mean, it's literally pins and needles. In that case, you're happy to have Andy because he's thinking also as a scenic designer and a choreographer, so he understands how things are moving. But
Right.
it's pins and needles all the time, and that's why I said earlier about I think of the set designer as kind of a co-conceiver of how you're going to present something. I feel like that's early on, before anything has been made. You think, how do we want to present this? Then I become like an architect and an installation artist, in which I'm like toiling away at making this thing happen beat by beat by beat. And then when we get back into previews and most of my work is done, I go back to being co-conceiver and thinking like, I've got to put myself in the place of an audience member and forget about what we made. Do I like it? Do the choices that we made actually ring true? Because when you see a bad show or a show that doesn't work, it's not because the intentions were wrong. It's because 30, 50, 100 people got together and they bought into this idea that they thought would work, but the audience barometer, meaning how you could actually experience the show as someone who is coming into it cold, was just off. Because I can't tell you the amount of times a director has said to me, oh my God, they're gonna love this moment, and then like it falls flat. And it's because they can't kind of stop drinking the Kool-Aid. And my job in previews is about kind of separating myself from the work that we've made and just saying, are these moments that we think we made actually playing like we thought they were be? And in that moment in Bandstand that you're talking about, we just took out the scissors and started cutting and cutting and cutting and cutting and cutting. And yeah, design wise, I was just trying to keep up. But you knew that, again, we were doing the right work and the good work. And I feel like you work the entire process, really and truly, all the way through rehearsal, all the way through tech, all the way through previews, in order to get to those precious 4-hour days during previews where you can, in real time, make choices that the audience undeniably is giving you the answer to every single night.
Right, you're absolutely right. And but it's an amazing thing. And part of it is you're talking about stepping back, stepping outside the process and trying to look at it objectively. And unfortunately, as we all know, there's so much anxiety, and the deadline is coming, and the audience is going to be here, and the critics are coming. And to take that moment is sometimes impossible, but necessary. to kind of take a breath and to step away and say, okay, forget about what we thought we were doing. Let's look at what we actually did, and is it working? And
Totally.
that's when you discover, and when you listen to the audience and when you watch them, they tell you what's working and what's not working. But then Bandstand did great for us. It was called the Bandstand when it was here, if you remember. Then we
It's
dropped
like the Facebook and Facebook.
Right. But then it moved to New York into that teeny tiny little theater. And you had to deliver, and the set at Paper Mill was huge, so much backstage moving around, to reconceive how the set worked and what kind of elements there were in a much smaller footprint, and deliver actually a step more of the environment to support the story, which you did brilliantly. I will never forget, because I knew that theater and there's no backstage, there's no wings. And I thought, how does this Cleveland set, which is basically a unit set with some things that move around, how is that going to disappear? Where's it going to go and transform into New York? And when it opened up and I thought, where's it going? And then New York arrived, that was amazing. So like,
well, if you want to know how big the backstage is at that theater, it's exactly the size of those Cleveland wagons, because that's where it went. It went wall to wall in the back. And you know, that's part of what I love design wise, is to kind of create real magic. You know, it's different than when you work in film and television, which I have a fair amount of experience also. You can cut away, you can stop the camera, you can go to a different soundstage. Part of what will never replace live theater and live performances is the fact that you saw it. It was right there 30 seconds ago. Those massive boxes, that entire Cleveland bar was right there, and then it went away. And that is truly something that makes the theater special, that discipline. But yeah, you know, I think that like innovation was like, you know, necessary in that moment.
But I don't know that another designer would have been as keen as you were on making that happen. Because I remember, I knew that moment. I knew when Cleveland goes away and New York arrives in the middle of that musical number. And I thought, where's all this going to go? Because I had seen it at our place, right? So at least the regional tryout in Paper Mill gave you the information, right, about what had to happen and how the show was going to track.
Yep.
So then you could be inspired and inventive enough to make that happen. But it's still, to me, one of the most unbelievable transformations I've ever seen in the theater, where an entire fully stage set literally just disappears before your eyes and you're in a new environment.
Well, thank you. I mean, listen, I will say that, again, going back to story, right? The story there is this environment had to peel away and fade away and be so cathartic, because the story is this tiny little band. It's like our, you know, Wizard of Oz troupe. They are going on this magical journey, and it had to be so transformative. It couldn't be like, oh, one wall flipped around and now we're in New York. It had to be like their whole world went away, and then a whole new world that was taller, glitzier, more fantastic, more magical, more filled with lights, more airy had to show up. And it took a lot, but the genesis of the idea had to do with the story. It had to be like, what could it possibly felt like for those people to make that journey? And it was going to be impossible to leave any part of Cleveland there on stage.
Yeah, it had to all disappear. Well, it was fantastic, and I'm so thrilled that the show was here first, and then I got to experience it there. It's still one of my son's favorite shows. We were there on opening night, and then we also were there on closing night, which was, you know, I still think that show was undersung, has such a great message, and just the entire package of it was beautiful. But two other things I wanted to talk to you about, because we had Joanne Hunter on here a few weeks back, and she said something about, people are always asking her, what's your style as a choreographer? And her answer was always, well, what is the show? And that's my style. And I read an article about you talking about that you like, or are proud of the fact that people don't look at a physical set and go, oh, that's a David Korins set, because you adapt your visual sense and the realization of the scenic elements to what's needed and what's dictated by the script.
She stole my line. She stole my line. Literally, I think that, or maybe I stole her line. I'm not really sure. Or we both have the same feeling. The truth is, as a visual artist, there are certain things I think as a human that you like and that you gravitate towards. Some people are more minimal. Some people like more clutter. You know, I think in my day-to-day life, I tend to actually be pretty minimal. You know, I said it a little bit earlier, we as designers have to ask ourselves, am I doing this because it would be cool? Am I doing this because it would be flashy? Am I doing it because I think like I could win an award, or because like it might get attention? None of that is important to me. I think the answer is, does this help tell the story? And the truth is, Bandstand should look nothing like Godspell. And Godspell should look nothing like The Diary of Anne Frank. And they should look nothing like Beetlejuice or Dear Evan Hansen or Hamilton or anything else. And if Hamilton looked like Beetlejuice, I think you'd be in trouble. So, you know, you have to challenge yourself to just not, to not apply a kind of physical aesthetic. The way I think about Frank Gehry, who's someone I, you know, admire tremendously, you know what a Frank Gehry building looks like. You do not want to know what a David Korins set looks like if you're comparing two shows to each other.
Right. Well, but that means you have to be so multi-talented in just the many different ways something could go. I think that's exciting, right? You don't want to keep repeating the same things you've done in the past. You want to challenge yourself. I also like the fact that I read somewhere that you said everything on a set is intentional. Nothing is by mistake. You said sometimes there's happy mistakes that happen, but everything is intentional. And I think you were, this was talking about the Hamilton set, which compared to some things you've done is fairly minimalistic, but complicated in its execution. But talking about the ropes that are tied and the reckoning back or harkening back to sailors' knots, and each piece of wood is specific and each brick is important. I mean, that obviously is an iconic piece of theater and now an iconic piece of America. And you created that physical environment, which, you know, people will look at for centuries. And talk about that journey, because I know that changed over time as well, about what the concept for the physical environment was going to be.
Well, when you say those things, the hairs on my arms raise up, because you know, I grew up being inspired by kind of iconic designs, and to feel like I'm even, you know, in a category where I was honored enough to make something like that or be part of something like that is just really and truly an out-of-body experience. It's so intense to think that I was part of making a piece of theater that really has become a high watermark in a lot of art. It's just really amazing. You know, to be truthful about it, the process of designing Hamilton was not much different than the process of designing anything else. You know, we thoughtfully met and did a whole lot of research and talked about the kind of story that we wanted to tell. A little bit, you know, in comparison to Anne Frank, as you said, had a blueprint, had a, that physical environment is kind of laid out for you. Lynn came to the first meeting and said, here's the manuscript. There's 51 songs, 30 years of American history, 27,000 words or whatever it was, and said, I have no preconceived notions of how it should be told, what it should look like, how it should move. Good luck, Andy. Good luck, Tommy. Good luck, David. Go. And you know, that was daunting. I felt the same way I did with Hamilton as I do with everything else, which is a huge responsibility to the writers and the other members of the creative team. I knew that we were never going to be able to wait for art, meaning we were not going to be able to do big scene changes like in Bandstand. There were too many scenes. There was too much information. And in 2 hours and 30 minutes or 2 hours and 45 minutes, we were never going to be able to wait to like make a fully formed Skylar mansion and then go to Washington's tent. So that show was about paring back and trying to figure out the least amount we needed to put on stage in order to be able to render each scene as realistically as possible. In my interview with Tommy Kail, I pitched the turntable to him. And he had never actually directed a show with a turntable, and Andy had never choreographed a show with a turntable, and they both were kind of like, not so sure. We then went on the journey of trying to create an environment that would be able to house all those different locations and all those different time periods. And we landed on something, as you talked about, that was kind of a tapestry of early American architecture, that it was a place that could, as you talk about, a unit set that could hold the bigger idea, getting back to what the set designer's job is. The big idea at work there is that this is a story about the people who, not about the people who founded the country, but who built the scaffolding from which we built the foundation of the country. And so the set design is about creating a foundational space that is about early American architecture. And there's literally a scaffolding there. And if you look closely between Act 1 and Act 2, the foundation grows, but it needs to inherently feel like it's a solid place from which all else has sprung. And then that turntable, 8 months later, we brought out the idea of like, hey, how are we going to move stuff around the stage? We should think about that idea again. And then after a series of sketches and conversations, we decided to add it back into the show. But a lot had to do with, again, no blueprint. How are we going to be able to stage this, sweeping, epic story, basically in one location? And, Hal Binkley, who recently passed away, lit that show, a dear friend, a dear collaborator, and Hal Binkley and Andy Blankenbuehler and Tommy Kail basically do a lot of the scenery's work. Hal and Andy make architecture out of nothing. Yeah. It is one of the great, if not the great privilege of my professional careers to work with those guys and watch them carve out worlds in this unit set that like weren't there 1 second ago.
Yeah. And what's so funny about that too is now a unit set like that is not a simple unit set. It's very complicated, and the turntable and all of that is terrific. But that's the kind of set that can morph easily when a show changes because there's not big elements. And yet not a lot of that show changed.
No, actually, that's funny. That one came out, I mean, not really, but almost fully baked.
I know.
And so much so that when we did it for, off Broadway at the Public Theater, which we basically scabbed together with like contact lenses and dental floss and like held that thing together with like, duct tape. When we were fortunate enough to transfer uptown to Broadway, half of the Broadway set is the set from the Public Theater. Wow. We just kind of added on to it a little bit because that catwalk, as rickety as ever, is the set from the Public Theater. We liked it that much, we kept it.
That's amazing. Oh my gosh, that is so funny. So listen, you've done so much. And first of all, I would just like to say, someday I'd like to work on a show with you and me. I'd love to direct something that you design because I'm such a fan of yours. But just as we're closing up, winding down, what would you like to do that you haven't done? What's a challenge for you? Wow. That something you'd like to design? Could be a show, could be ballet, opera. I don't know. Another restaurant.
I'd like to design the opening ceremony of the Olympics. Put that out into the world. Oh. I'd like to design a big revival, which I've never really done a big revival. And the truth is, there are 6,742 things that you're going to do in your life, and then that's going to be it. And I want to just keep working with people who are wonderful. Sometimes the greatest joys are in the projects that, don't have the critical acclaim or don't wind up lasting for that long. I think we live and work in a collaborative art form, and that is the real gold. It's those relationships. It's like, I've known you for many, many years now, and the shows in a way blend together, but the people don't. They remain seminal and important. And so I want to keep doing that. I consider myself incredibly blessed to be able to do what I do every day. And I think that this moment in time, when we're all kind of like at home waiting to see if we can continue to do what we do, it's only made me, value those things much more. So seeing you and spending time with you and talking with you today is, it's bittersweet, because we really have done most of our work in a dark room together, making a thing.
Right.
And now we are sitting in separate spaces doing that, but I can't wait to get back. I mean, that's really what I want to do. I want to keep working with wonderful people.
Well, I couldn't have said it better. And I am so grateful for our friendship. I'm so grateful
Same.
for our professional relationship. I can't offer you the Olympics, although I think you would be spectacular at that. We could, work on a big revival here at Paper Mill. That would be fun.
I'll take it too. I'll take that
right.
too.
But nothing would please
Revival
me
Olympics, Revival Olympics,
You can have them both. Nothing would please me more than to be in a dark room with you, working on another exciting project. So
Same.
thank you for being part of the Paper Mill
Thank you.
family, and thank you for joining us here today on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Good to see you.
Take care.
Thanks for tuning in tonight. And make sure to join us next week on Babbling by the Brook, when we learn all about the huge job of a production stage manager. I'll be joined by my two good friends, Beverly Jenkins and Andrea Sibeli. See you then.